couple of solar panels. They're 300 watt 20 volt panels basically. Got 6 of them for free the other week. Someone was throwing them out, so I thought I would get a controller just to test them out. I picked up a Victron MPPT 500 volt 50 amp unit there, and the other bits I had. So these are batteries for the Batpod that I'm using. They're headway cells, 8 amp hour cells. They sit at about 3.2 volts and can be charged up to 3.6, but then they make their way back down to 3.2, and you can discharge them as much as 2.5 volts. So you need a battery management system to make sure you don't ruin your lipos. I bought this one. It's a Chargery unit. It's for a 24 cell pack. You can see there's the BMS for 24 batteries there. So the Batpod had a 24 cells in series, and I had 2 lots of packs. So I had 48 batteries. This next Batpod I might increase that by another 24 cells. But anyway, I thought I'd test out my equipment. So the battery BMS there, that's the control unit. This is the switch that you get. So this is a 300 amp DC switch, and a shunt here that comes with it as well, just to measure your amps being used. And this little part here is the control unit for your BMS. So you've got down your individual voltages here, starting with cell 1 all the way up here, cell 1 down to cell 8. So it can go up to 24 cells, and it's actively balancing the pack, or discharging the voltage actually from the higher cells, so as it matches the lower cells. And there's only 11 millivolts between the highest and the lowest cell there. I've set it to have to 3.55 to be the highest voltage, to when the system switches off here, so as no more charge goes into the battery pack, and then it'll resume charging once all the cells reach 3.5 volts. So it's switched off at the moment. You can see here it's got a power on light, but this little switch over here indicates that the switch is actually off at the moment. So that cuts the charge through to the batteries. But I got to say, it does a pretty good job. When I first set up the charger before putting on the BMS, I only had 4 cells. I was running a 12 volt system, so I thought I'd jump it up to 24 just to try it out, as I wanted to use my BMS, and that's one straight cable there for a 24 volt. And the cells are a bit out of balance. The newer ones I put in weren't as charged or discharged as the other ones, and this thing here has leveled them out really well. So only 11 microvolts between them. So that's your screen that shows your voltages. That's your current charge. I'm fully charged at the minute. State of charge is at 100%. So I'm drawing 0 amps according to the shunt, which is correct. It's got a few settings that you can set up here. So there you go, that's your high voltage, 355. Your return voltage of your charging system was 3.5. Overcurrent amps was 50 amps. I could set that to considerably higher if I chose. As I said, these are 8 amp cells, but they're rated at 10C, so I could pull 80 amps out of each cell without any issue. And I got a 300 amp shunt here, so I can change that for the Batpod. Over discharge current, there you go, so that is set to 300. Temperature cutoffs, we zip on down. This is your over discharge, or if the batteries get below 3 volts. I could set it to 2.6, I suppose. Cut off, and then once it resumes, once the charge gets up to 3.5, it would resume discharge again. This is a pretty neat little thing because this is controlled by this box here. So this is you could do both charging and discharging from the one. However, I don't think it's real practical, because if it gets to maximum voltage, it'll discharge, which would also discharge your inverter. So if you're running anything on it, when it reaches maximum charge, it would switch it off. So you really need 2 of these, one to disconnect the charge and one to disconnect, which I can sit over here, the inverter. So settings, high temperature cutoff. This one was interesting, the difference of cell voltage. It was yesterday when it was out of balance and I was charging them up. The newer cells were charging up quite quickly and the older ones weren't. So the difference of cell voltage was quite was getting to 200 to 300 microvolts. So it would switch off. So I thought, well, that's a bit silly. So I've zipped it right up to 600 to allow the cell difference. But now that they're balanced, it's actually working fine. But yeah, I had to fiddle with this just to get the cells balanced. I could drop it right down now to 100 or 200 difference of cell voltage, because when you're discharging as well, if your cells are out of whack and it draws more out of one than the other, then it'll again shut off the system. So that's an interesting function. Beeper. Cutoff delay I've set to 4 seconds, just to set your current calibration. You don't want to do that unless you're using a different shunt, because that shunt is calibrated at the factory to this particular setup, and it's a bit of a task to get it calibrated, so we don't want to mess with that. Empty cell voltage, full cell voltage. Not sure what that does yet, because it tends to use the other ones at the top to control the BMS. You don't want to change your default settings enable, otherwise you'll mess up, and this is where you set your battery capacity. Cut off temperature, discharge, and I'm running that firmware version. So yeah, don't know if it's of any use to people who have set up or purchased a Chargery, but it seems to be quite a good little unit. Something I did have an issue with yesterday before I set it up here is I had the switch discharge on the photovoltaic side, so it was cutting off the power going into the Victron there and coming straight out of the Victron into the shunt, and that was giving me some weird results. It was giving me 540 amps when it was just sitting there. It would flick between 0 and 540 amps, so some sort of interference was going on there. But since I flipped it over to this side of it to cut off the actual power to the battery, it's working much better. It's also got a pre-charge resistor in it, so you don't get that zap. It's a fairly good little unit. Okay.